So today wanted to bring you some information in terms of irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, and some dietary modifications that you can make. And we'll leave time at the very end with questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free. We'll just start talking, make it informal. So you got the slides, right? Okay. Awesome. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about nutrition, and some of this stuff is labeled around COVID just because of the situation we're in right now and immunity, but I am going to talk mostly about dietary modifications you can make for irritable bowel syndrome. There's a lot of information out there in terms of nutrition and how it can be linked with immunity. Talking about supplements and understanding more about the link between nutrition and immunity and the role of diet that can be played during this time. So IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, is not an inflammatory condition, but it's usually a diagnosis when everything else has been ruled out, whether it's inflammatory ulcerative colitis or inflammatory bowel disease or Crohn's disease or celiac. And then you still have a lot of the same symptoms as IBD, but you're left with, bloating. For some people, it's either diarrhea or constipation or both. And looking at some of those symptoms and seeing if we can use dietary modifications to improve them. Next slide. Perfect. So what gastroenterologists actually developed was something called Low Fodmap. FODMAP actually stands for something. It stands for fermentable, oligosaccharide, disaccharide, monosaccharide, and polyol. That's why we call it FODMAP. And what gastroenterologists found is that people who struggle with irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS, at the Monash University in Australia, that's where this diet actually originated, is that people would take either gluten or dairy out of their diet and notice that there were some improvements made, but long term they were still having symptoms. So what the gastroenterologists found is that fructose, which is a kind of carbohydrate, is actually causing a lot of those symptoms, and it can be found naturally in other foods, not just in gluten or in lactose. So by eliminating or reducing the total load of fructose in somebody's diet for a short period of time, that is very important, that it's not done forever, it's done for a short period. We can actually add the fructose back in and identify what kinds of foods are actually their triggers. So Low Fodmap has been around for a long time. There is an app, and I put it on the slide there. It's the Monash University Low Fodmap Diet. The important thing to know is that by Googling or by using not credible based information, you're probably going to get a lot of inconsistency which foods are safe and which foods are considered high FODMAP or high in fructose. So the ultimate goal of this is to reduce the total high load diet for a short period of time and then add it back in. And so that's what FODMAP is. I'll explain a little bit in terms of which foods would be considered high fructose and which foods would be considered low fructose. But I think one of the most important things is to recognize that it can be confusing. Having somebody kind of guide you in terms of amounts and what specific foods are considered safe or high in fructose is ultimately your best way to be successful with this plan. Next slide. So what basically happens is that when somebody takes in or ingests a high load of fructose that could be coming from a variety of foods, there's different groups of fructose that are evident. There's groups from the polyols, there's groups from the fructans group, the lactose group, and the excess fructose group. I don't expect you to remember all this, but just giving this whole idea of the next 30 minutes is to give you an overview in terms of what's involved with Low Fodmap, and then we'll give you some resources at the very end that you can use if you need more information or more details. So what happens is when somebody takes a high load of fructose into their body, it goes into the small bowel, and the small bowel is like, I don't know what you want me to do with these foods. I find it really difficult to absorb, and it pushes it down into the colon where it's fermented rapidly. And for a lot of people can cause some kind of bloating or fullness or either diarrhea or constipation. So by lowering that load, you have a lot less strain on the digestive tract and it relieves a lot of those symptoms. So one of the key things is looking at which foods are considered high or low. It's not a 0 grams of fructose diet, it's just lowering the load. The reason we only do low FODMAP for a very short period of time, which is ultimately about 2 to 3 weeks of reducing the total load of fructose, is because you actually compromise the resistant starch or the fiber by doing this. And it can change the microbiome or the bacteria within the gut. I'm going to give you more information about the microbiome and what exactly happens later on. But really important that in terms of FODMAPs, for example, it's not necessarily fructose just found in sugary foods that you think of, like high fructose corn syrup coming from candy or pop or things like that. Fructose is actually found naturally in a wide variety of foods. And what they do at the Monash University is they test the level of fructose to glucose or regular sugar. If the amount of fructose when they test the foods is above 0.5, it's considered high in FODMAPs and considered something that we want to kind of remove for a short period of time. If it's below 0.5, it might be higher in glucose, which is regular sugar. Sugar can create more inflammation, but it's safe according to the elimination diet. So for example, when they test things like sugars, honey is considered high. Okay, so honey is considered high in fructose, but regular brown sugar or pure maple syrup is considered low. So you would be able to have pure maple syrup on a low FODMAP diet, but try to avoid things high in honey. So ultimately, after you finish removing all the high loads of fructose, it doesn't mean you can't have any of these foods. It just means that for the elimination, it makes more sense to eliminate all of them so we can add them back in and the reintroduction phase becomes easier. Okay, so this is actually a really, really good time to look at low FODMAP if you do struggle with IBS or irritable bowel syndrome, because there's very little access compared to what usually is to restaurants and to eating out, and there's a lot less temptations. So if you're looking at gut health and you've always kind of wanted to know which foods are really bothering me, ironically, this pandemic in the last 3 months has probably been the most successful time I've had with doing something like low FODMAP, because most of our meals are at home. The majority are all at home. We're eating a lot of the foods that we create. We're doing a lot more cooking, and it is an opportune time to kind of figure out what are the problems before things start opening up and we get busy again. Next slide. Thank you. So in terms of supplements, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the microbiome and go back to that later. This jumps back to like the whole immunity thing. It's important that we're kind of gaining a lot of different kinds of vitamins and minerals. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to supplement. The whole idea of supplementation is that you need to have a foundation in your diet. And if you're deficient in something, then you look at supplementing. But sometimes supplementing something you're already getting a lot of isn't necessarily the best thing because it won't be as effective. So the vitamins and minerals that are specifically linked to immunity are the ones that are in foods that are high or rich in antioxidants. So vitamin A and beta carotene. And if you eat a lot of the foods, and I've listed them here for you, that are found underneath vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, selenium, and zinc, then you might not necessarily need a supplement because you're already getting these from your diet. Plus you get a lot more from your diet than just, when you get pumpkin, you're not necessarily just getting vitamin A and beta carotene, you're also getting fiber at the same time. Same thing with dark leafy greens, you're getting a lot of B vitamins that you might not necessarily get if you just took a vitamin A supplement. Next slide. So the best thing to look at is clinical evidence-based research in regards to supplements. With this whole pandemic, there's been a lot of marketing in regards to take this supplement because it'll help your immunity, or take this and do that. And it's a lot of Googling, which I've kind of written is the internet provides plenty of answers, but some are reliable and then others are not. There's there's a lot of information about vitamin D deficiency, which can be common with people who have digestive issues and also has a huge role in protecting there's been recent research out with vitamin D, and it's linked to COVID as well. But all in all, we don't get enough vitamin D within our diet, and that's one that you could be looking at supplementing just because, in Calgary. Obviously, we're not outside as often as we should be. So vitamins and minerals can impact overall immunity, but not any single one is going to influence your total immune system. So again, using nutritional supplements should not be considered to be a substitute for a good diet, and finding a balanced diet with a variety of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes, fibers, and nuts and things like that will actually provide you the same amount, if not more, of the vitamins and minerals you may be looking for with the supplement. Next slide. So a couple things in terms of the grocery shopping. What I've done with a lot of my clients is I've actually given them some references in terms of where the best places to shop are right now, because it can be challenging. And our whole idea of flattening the curve is not to jump to 6 different grocery stores and go shopping. There's not as many issues right now with the limitations with the food supply as there was at the end of March or April. But there are tons of home delivered programs that can help and that are consistently helping right now. Looking at special grocery store hours for seniors and high risk, which are still being offered, is a great option to go to a store when it's less busy. And then also using contactless curbside pickup. There's a lot of local places that are doing delivery as well, especially when we look at Low Fodmap. If I jump back there for a second, the Low Fodmap diet, it's really interesting. A lot of people who I see will go, yeah, wheat definitely is my trigger, right? Like I can't tolerate wheat for sure. But interesting, within that group of fructose, where wheat is found, there's also 2 of the biggest ones, biggest triggers, garlic and onion. So garlic and onion are actually a higher load of fructose than you would find in wheat. So looking for specific products, which is really hard to do if you're looking to try a low FODMAP diet, is really hard to do if you're trying to avoid garlic and onion, because garlic and onion is in everything, right? Like tomato sauces and barbecue sauces and ketchup and seasoning salts, and right, like it's actually in more things than when you probably think it is in, and it's hard to avoid. So there's specific products out there now. One specifically is called Fody, F-O-D-Y, and I can give you information about that at the end. But they actually have come out with a product, it's Canadian based, that will provide you with like pasta sauces or salad dressings or spices, different oils that you can use, broth, salsa, things that are going to be so hard for you to find in the grocery store without garlic and onion. So you can order them online now. They're not charging shipping, but you can also order it from local places like Spud, where they have the entire line online, and you can order through there as well. But going to a store that you know well, kind of having your routine, is probably the best thing you can do, and planning a shopping list ahead so you limit the number of times you go to the grocery store during a week. And next slide. So separating the myths and the facts with food safety, and I think when I did this presentation originally, I think it was the week 3 for the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, the information about food safety is very different than what it is right now. There's a lot more research coming out the more we learn about COVID, about how it's not as likely to contract it on surfaces or by surfaces. So this information about, washing your fruits and vegetables really well, not having to use soap for doing that, but just, cleaning off counters and regular kind of hygiene and food safety still comes into play. But it's interesting to see how things have changed in regards to containers that we use to package food, making sure they're clean, and just if you're bringing things into the house, and just taking extra caution with that. And next slide. So jumping back to the marvelous microbiome, and this is talking about the diversity of the bacteria within the gut. So as we get older, the diversity within our bacteria and how those bacteria look tend to change. And so you actually want a microbiome or a gut that has bacteria that all look completely different. The more diverse those bacteria are, the better or more efficient it works. As we get older, we tend to lose the diversity of the microbiome anyway, right? And so if you have gut issues, like if you have IBS or an inflammatory condition, or you have issues with any of those GI symptoms that I've already mentioned, like the diarrhea, bloating, constipation, and reflux even, okay? So any kind of reflux or GERD, all of those things can affect what the bacteria look like, okay? And so especially with women, as we kind of approach the age where estrogen level starts to drop and you go through perimenopause, that can also contribute to changes within the microbiome. So what we want to do is to maintain that diversity. The food that we eat plays a big role in terms of how those bacteria look. And so there are some fermented gut healing kind of foods that you probably have heard of, like the sourdough bread or the yogurts or kimchi or kombucha, miso. All of those things can actually make your microbiome change and actually create more diversity. But in terms of the one dietary thing that helps create that diversity and maintain it, it's fiber. And fiber is so important for your diet. Typically, it's interesting when you look at the trends. As we kind of get older and if weight becomes an issue, some people will automatically look at reducing the total amount of carbs. And as you reduce the total amount of carbs within your diet, that fiber intake also goes down. So a popular diet right now is like keto, right? Where you're going super high fat or high protein and then minimizing the amount of carbs. If you have digestive issues, those kinds of diets might not necessarily be the best thing in terms of your microbiome because you're compensating how much fiber you're actually getting. So for women, you should be getting about 25 grams per day. And for men, you should be getting about 38 grams per day. Okay, so if we're only getting 5 to 10 grams of fiber because we're following a low carb diet, then what you're doing long term is affecting the microbiome. So when we talked about low FODMAP and a way to reduce a lot of these symptoms and using a diet like low FODMAP to help, what you're doing, and the reason it is only short term, is you're actually decreasing the amount of resistant starch. Because by taking out the wheat for a short period of time, and a lot of those prebiotic fibers that are found from things like garlic, onion, artichokes, all of those things are taken out, you can actually change the microbiome in up to 5 days. So it's really important while doing a low FODMAP diet and during that elimination phase that you're not compensating how much fiber you're getting, because the fiber is actually going to take you this far, but low FODMAP will be a quick fix in terms of reducing your symptoms. If you keep going with it, ultimately you're changing the microbiome and might not have great results. Next slide. So one of the ways that you can increase that diversity and promote a healthier microbiome is eating a wide range of fiber-based foods. There's two different kinds of fiber. You have the soluble-based fiber from things like oatmeal, and then you have like the insoluble fiber, which is more like your salads or raw fruits and vegetables. If you're feeling really symptomatic and you're having a lot of symptoms, then the foods that are higher in insoluble fiber are going to be much harder for your body to digest and break down and might cause you more symptoms and more pain, right? But if you're feeling really symptomatic and you choose something that's soothing, like smoothies or soups or cooked vegetables, oatmeals, things like that, then that's actually like a sponge going through your system, and it's much easier for your body to absorb and digest. So there's a balance of what kinds of fiber works. A lot of people, ironically, with digestive issues or functional digestive disorders are very afraid of fiber. And I think it's the way in which they're actually including it as part of their diet that might not be the safest or most effective way. But if you find a balance between that soluble and insoluble fiber, then your microbiome is a lot happier, which can help reduce inflammation and in turn improve a lot of the GI symptoms that you're having. So when we talk about probiotics, that's another way that you can actually improve the microbiome. That being said, probiotics are marketed for everybody, right? And they're all completely different, and it makes more sense to look at a probiotic and target an area where you're actually looking. There are different probiotics that you would use for somebody who has eczema versus somebody who has lactose intolerant versus somebody who has inflammatory bowel disease, right? Or SIBO or something like that. So it's important that you match the probiotic with what you're actually targeting. During a low FODMAP diet, I rarely recommend somebody start a probiotic during the elimination because we're never going to know what's working if you see improvements. So it makes more sense to try the dietary modifications first and then kind of look at a probiotic. Ironically, there's a lot of probiotics that actually the first ingredient there is considered fructose. So if you haven't seen massive improvements while you're on a probiotic, it could be the ingredients in it and the fact that it's considered high in fructose or high in FODMAPs and not working effectively because you're not able to absorb it. So looking at specific probiotics are very, very important. There's other different anti-inflammatory properties that you can get from things like bone broth or avocado that's super high in omega-3. Omega-3 has been seen to help reduce inflammation that you can use in conjunction with a low FODMAP diet. Avocado is actually considered one of those like right along the cusp there. So during the elimination, unless it's something that somebody includes all the time, I typically kind of reduce the amount. But the thing about the low FODMAP diet is that it's really based on how much or what the load of fructose that you're actually having is. So it doesn't mean that even if you come out of the elimination, you go through the reintroduction and you identify that garlic and onion are two of your biggest triggers, and who knew that's what was actually causing your bloating, that you never have to get, that you can never have garlic and onion again. It just means that we watch the load of the garlic and onion over time, and having too much will cause issues, and it allows you to find a way to control it. And next slide. So as I mentioned briefly before, there's some people have their own kind of IBS eating plan, and whether it's that kind of works for you and maintains that digestive health or reduces some of the symptoms, or using something like a low FODMAP diet. This is the best time to look at any kind of elimination diet, specifically low FODMAP. It isn't something that needs to be like 0 grams, so you're able to modify it. But the fact that we're not eating out as frequently, it's harder to kind of eat out at this point, so it's easier to actually maintain control at home. This is probably one of the best times that I've had in terms of this being a great learning opportunity to do any kind of self-care with dietary changes or modifications. It's not about being perfect, and I can guarantee that if you kind of make these changes, it actually is in half the time. Pre-COVID, when I was doing low FODMAP diet in office, it might take 3 to 4 weeks for people to kind of complete the elimination and get through the process, because they were traveling, or they were having a dinner this weekend, or getting together with friends. So it was easier to just kind of push it off and start till Monday, or have a couple days in between where they could eat what they want. Now, without those kinds of things happening, you actually can finish this entire elimination in 2 weeks. Since the pandemic started, so I think we're 13 weeks on Monday, it's hard to believe. It's 13 weeks on Monday. This is my 3rd round of meeting with patients and doing the elimination and reintroduction. It's going that quickly because things are so controlled. So I think that the best diet right now is one that minimizes trips to the store. The idea of doing a low FODMAP elimination is not to send people to 6 different stores and get the ingredients they need to do it. It's using the things in their house and making tweaks to see if it makes a difference overall with their digestive system. Next slide. Perfect. So including a lot of meals and things like that you could do as a family, if you have kids at home. That's another challenge, with doing this when things are kind of open. And if you are somebody who has kids or a family that you're running around in the evening to 4,000 different activities, none of that is actually here right now. You can get the kids involved, or your husband or wife involved with doing a lot of the prep. Looking that because there's such a large proportion of our immune system that's housed within our gut, this gut microbiome plays a pivotal role in determining when and how well our immune system operates. There's an amazing website, which I'm happy to pass on to you. It's called gutmicrobiotaforhealth.com, and it's all clinical evidence-based, and there's amazing articles talking certain deficiencies in terms of our immune system overall.
Right. Do you mind?
Yeah.
Can you just cut out for a moment? Do you mind repeating that?
Yeah.
Please?
So one of the best websites is the gutmicrobiotaforhealth.com. And I can list it in the chat maybe after, and I'll write it down for you. The reason it's so great is because it's all clinical evidence-based, and there's tons of research on there, not just directly related to IBS, but it's also related to the immune system. And even if you have different autoimmune conditions like arthritis, right? Chronic fatigue syndrome, thyroid issues, Parkinson's, all of those are actually linked to the microbiome. There's more and more research right now with all of this information in terms of the bacteria, and how overall it really indicates what's going on with how we manage our whole system. So there's a nerve called the vagus nerve, which actually connects the gut and the brain. If you look at IBS, one of the primary things that is said is like, well, it's stress, it's anxiety. it's mood, things like that. And that is a massive part of it for sure, right? Like it is a part of it, but it's not, there's a clinical reason as to why people have those kinds of issues. And if that connection between the gut and the brain isn't as fluid, then there might be some kind of, improvement that we could make by making sure that connection works better. Because what does the brain control? It controls hormones, it controls inflammation, everything. So if you don't have this clear connection, because these bacteria aren't as good or aren't as diverse as what they should be, it's going to be a lot harder for you to see improvements in all of those conditions I just mentioned. So if somebody has arthritis and they also have IBS, they will find that if their gut kind of is off, their arthritis might be flaring at the same time, right? But if you can improve the gut, so it improves a lot of the bacteria there and the IBS improves, people normally find that their arthritis will improve at the same time too, because it's all connected. So focusing on the right decisions in terms of which modifications you can make, and they're not massive, right? And I met with a woman this morning who was like, I've tried this and this and this, and she was literally like, 80% there, and it was just making a couple of adjustments and tweaks to go, oh, right? Ironically, people with functional gut disorders are doing a little bit better now during this pandemic, even with all the outstanding kind of stress and anxiety there is, because they don't have the dietary stuff that's actually bothering them, right? And a lot of people are kind of paying attention to, you know what? My symptoms were a lot worse in November when I was eating or stopping for Starbucks or doing this or doing that. Now that I'm not doing any of that, I feel fantastic because they have way more control. So it might kind of change how we manage things when things start to open up and they're better. So the last little point here is just that, as you can see, like this is virtual. I've been working virtually since March 14th. Okay, so this is an easy thing for me to do because I don't need to see people in office, and a lot of dietitians, especially who specialize in this area, are working virtually right now. So it shouldn't feel like this opportunity isn't available just because things are closed. At the Glencoe, we're able to do this virtually as well. If you do have extended healthcare plan, registered dietitians are still covered. And actually a lot of plans, just so you know, with Sun Life and Canada Life, Blue Cross, are actually going above and beyond what their coverage was for virtual consultations because they realize the pandemic is kind of going on. So coverage that you might not have had before could have changed during the pandemic. So it's worth checking because a lot of people are kind of using their opportunity to look at this now. I think that was it. That was just the kind of the credit. So I left some time at the very end here, just for any kind of questions that you have. There's obviously like specific foods. What I do when I meet with clients is I'll give you a whole list of pages, a whole list of foods that these are the ones that are considered safe. And then there's other ones that are considered the ones that we try to limit over the next couple weeks. So it's a lot more structured, but I thought I wanted to give you more of an overview just because it was a short kind of presentation in terms of what's involved with Low Fodmap and that there is an option. If you are one of those people who are walking around who feel bloated, think that it's kind of normal, women tend to kind of normalize that as well, especially as we hit 40 plus, because we kind of attribute it to like perimenopause, but most of the bloating can actually be brought down, right? Like, and pretty fast. A lot of the patients that I'm working with, they're finding improvements within 48 to 72 hours of just looking at reducing the high load of fructose. So because it's clinical evidence-based, it's a great option to try it. It's not something that's been around forever. It's probably been around for the last 10 to 12 years, but it's 75% effective with those people who have IBS and about 75 to 80% effective for those people who have inflammatory bowel disease as well.